All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Raw Intuition Health Show. We've got another incredible guest and a great topic today for you. We are going to be talking about heart health and how to keep your heart healthy, into old age. So this week, we're joined by the amazing Dr. Daniel Chong, ND. Dr. Chong has been a naturopathic doctor out of Portland, Oregon since 2000, the year 2000, utilizing natural methods to help his patients regain and maintain optimal health. Dr. Chong especially focuses on helping patients with cardiovascular disease through extensive training in this field. He considers himself a nutrition and lifestyle oriented lipidologist and a cardiovascular health facilitator, in addition to his role as a naturopathic doctor. Dr. Chong founded vitalhuman.com and offers private telehealth consults, group coaching for heart attack and stroke prevention, in-person consultations, and his Vital Human Healthy Aging Club membership. And I've got all of this linked in the description box down below, so I definitely encourage you guys to check that out. In this episode, as I said, we're going to be talking about how to protect your health as you age. And so let's bring in Dr. Chong to the show. Welcome, Dr. Chong. Thanks for being here.
Hey there. Good to see you. Good to see you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you. So I actually last week, so my program OBS kind of updated a few weeks ago, and I lost my chat. So guys, I can't see you in the chat right now, but I hope you're there. I'll have to bring up an additional YouTube page here and just mute it for me, so I can kind of follow along with the chat a little bit. But yeah, I'm excited to get started with this conversation and to introduce people to you, Dr. Chong, that aren't aware of the work that you're doing at this point. Would you mind just kind of sharing a little bit of your backstory and how you got into, becoming a naturopathic doctor and what got you interested in cardiovascular health and that sort of thing?
Yeah. Basically, I'll try to make a long story short. Um, I always wanted to be a doctor as a kid. My dad was a surgeon, and I always wanted to be a doctor. But as I kind of got a little bit older, I kind of had this disconnect to some aspects of it, just almost like unconsciously. Like I didn't like to take aspirin or whatever, and my dad was always talking about being healthy and eating well and whatever. So that kind of got instilled in me too. Uh, and in college, I was in pre-med, but I wasn't really interested in it. And I was kind of like, maybe I'll do something else. And then I literally saw a poster on the wall from the naturopathic college that I ended up going to. This was literally pre-internet time. So it had like a little tearaway send for a pamphlet and learn more about this school. And I was like, what is this? I've never heard of that before. And got like the pamphlet back. As soon as I read the pamphlet, I was like, oh my gosh, there's that kind of doctor in the world. Like I didn't even know that existed. And it was just instantly like, oh, that's what I'm going to do. And then about halfway kind of through things, about 10 years into it, I just started getting more and more interested in cardiovascular disease for a lot of reasons, maybe some of which we'll talk here about here. And so just sort of started diving in and had some interesting kind of related to where we are, your channel, and what types of diets you recommend. Some interesting experiences. I don't know if you know this, but like the first 10 years of my practice, I was basically a card carrying paleo diet eater. And
Wow.
the Weston Price Foundation, pretty low carb, and was promoting that to my patients, etc. And it wasn't until I started studying cardiovascular disease more intently that I started realizing that I might have things a little wrong. And I try to think like a scientist and always be open-minded and to better evidence. And the stuff I started reading was hard to deny, even though my initial reaction was like, a low fat vegan diet, there's no way that's going to kill people, and and yet all these people's lives were being like altered for the better with these studies. Um, and so I just kind of had to put down all of my preconceived ideas. And I started learning more about what good research looks like and what uh, less good research looks like, and what things I was believing that were literally just repeated to me from some other person that never actually looked at good research.
Hmm.
So it really just opened my eyes. And then, so since then, I've just been just getting more and more, into it, working with patients in the last 12 years now of doing that, and just seeing pretty amazing results with people. And yeah, goes without saying, cardiovascular disease is the number one killer still by far. And so there's still a lot of work to do, but doing my best. So here I am.
Awesome. That's amazing. Um, and and that's just a testament to your character, I would say, that you were able to, kind of look at the evidence you were seeing, even though it went against, what you had previously believed, and you decided to look further into it. And after seeing that the evidence was overwhelming, that you made that change. So,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
yeah, I'm curious, what kind of, when people would come to you when you were, and I actually somewhat used to be the same, where I was really into like Weston Price Foundation and that sort of
yeah.
information.
It's very
And
logical, right?
yeah,
It all
yeah,
sounds like, oh yeah, of course.
yes, yep. What kind of results were you seeing when you were, promoting that approach to people, and then how eye-opening was it once you started uh, promoting more of a low-fat plant-based diet?
Yeah. Well, I honestly, during that time, I didn't see very many people with cardiovascular related issues. I was doing a lot more different types of medicine, IV therapy, injections, and different things like that.
Okay.
Um, a lot of musculoskeletal stuff. And so I didn't, but I do always remember pretty early on, after having um, done what I told you already about
Hmm.
realizing some of these things, and starting to embrace that, and implement new, plant-based eating ideas, et cetera, into my practice. I always remember this one patient who I had seen during who was eating a paleo diet, mostly on my recommendation, but he was, he liked to research and whatever. And I hadn't seen him for a few years. And then he contacted me because he had a stroke.
Mm.
And he was like, at that time, he was probably in his early 60s. So that's pretty young for that to happen. And at that time, on what you would call a perfect paleo diet, super clean, high quality meat, et cetera, all the things that people make excuses and say, oh, well, that study doesn't count because the meat was not as good quality as what I eat or whatever. He was eating
Hmm.
all that stuff, and he had a stroke. And I was like, okay, which is what I do, which we'll talk about probably. Like, let's dig. And we did some more advanced lab testing, and things were not very good. His cholesterol was super high, his inflammation markers were high, and his blood sugar was interestingly a little higher than you would expect for a low carb paleo diet. And he exercised every day. So that was interesting. And so I had him, and he's one of these, like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Mm.
And so he switched completely, almost overnight, to what you'd call like a low fat, whole food, plant-based diet. And all of his markers in 2 months just went into perfect. Like, it was pretty amazing. Doesn't always happen that way with everybody for different reasons, but it was just like everything that I would have wanted to not be looking like it was looking, having just had a stroke, went into the optimal range like instantly. And he's been doing, and like, I did some imaging studies on him, and he had a lot of plaque buildup in every artery that I looked at. And that was probably almost 10 years ago now, and he's just been on that program ever since, doing well, no problems. I mean, he's still, it's not like all the plaque is going to disappear, but I'm not worried about him.
Mhm.
And so that was pretty amazing.
Wow. Yeah. Um, I I've seen, I've been looking at a lot of your stuff, and I see that you did a training with Dr. Khan, which I'm a big fan of as well. And I hear a lot of stories similar to that,
Yeah.
so um, it's kind of amazing. Why do you think, with this information, that you've come across, and other doctors like Dr. Khan, I feel like it's getting harder not to come across this information, maybe. Why are more cardiologists and other doctors not kind of taking that same transition that you took, and start promoting more of a plant-based diet?
Um, that's a really good question. And I would never say that I have the definitive answer to that. I have some hunch thoughts, and it's interesting. I continue to do trainings, especially in the conventional realm, just learning everything I can learn on that side. And
Hmm.
in general, nowadays, it's pretty well recognized that, just in general cardiology, that a plant-based diet is either plant-based diet or like Mediterranean diet, which is mostly plants, avoiding red meat, blah blah blah, is considered by most of them to be the optimal way. They still, what I don't see changing is the enthusiasm that they promote that via, and it's still like uh, if our risk calculators shows it to be so, you need a statin, period. Like, there's no like, have you seen this study and what are these amazing effects that you can get from a plant-based diet? It's more like, and also make sure you're trying to eat more vegetables and less red meat. So there's acknowledgement of it, but there's not a lot of like really revealing to people what's possible, which I think is, to me, whatever medical intervention we're talking about, the only way that we can do that appropriately for people is to give them a fully informed decision to make, so they know all of the possibilities and then they get to choose. Like, that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Um, and and yet most of the patients I talk to who see cardiologists are never told anything about any of these studies that have been done, um, and what's possible without medication. And it's probably a product of, they don't want to stand out, they don't want to be scrutinized, they don't want to, most of them are practicing in large organizations and whatever, and they don't have the resources to educate people. um, they'll just send them to maybe a dietitian who doesn't really talk like that in either, unless they're weird. um, so so there's that, and then unfortunately there's also this what seems to be a growing crowd of louder people speaking from the opposite end of the spectrum, um, telling everybody that saturated fat is actually good for you. We've been lied to. All the research for the last 150 years is all not true, and you can just throw it out the window because it's only epidemiology, and it's trick. I see it actually trickling down into some people. Like, I see there's this cardiologist that's local to me here who he's interesting. It's almost like, I don't know what happens when you have this mindset of like a healthy distrust of, just accepting automatically what you're told by authorities that might be influenced by drug companies, which I think is a good thing.
Hmm.
It makes you then start to question other things that maybe are legitimate. But some people are just like, it all must be, BS.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna not, and then there's these people out there now, as I'm sure you've seen, who are just relentlessly amplifying that type of messaging around diet, cardiovascular disease, cholesterol. Does it even have a role? We can talk about that, but like, so I think it's a lot of different influences, different people. So that's how I would see it.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
I will also just say, sorry,
Yeah.
having come from my background as I described, um, I, I fully acknowledge that some people feel better eating certain ways and other ways, and
Mhm.
I'm always interested in like, okay, cool, whatever you're doing, if you feel really good, that's good. Feeling good is important, but we always have to remember that you cannot feel the insides of your arteries. If they're inflamed, if they're getting damaged, if they've got plaque building up in them, you cannot feel that. So even if you're feeling good, you lost weight, your energy's better, etc., we still should look inside in certain ways, blood testing, etc., to make sure that how you're feeling is reflecting the health of your insides and not just happening temporarily until whatever changes you made start to take a negative effect on your body. So that kind of just cuts away everybody's opinions, like, or studies even. And I'm just like, what's the person's in front of me? What do they look like?
Yeah.
And we go from there more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting that it's weird how the body's designed where we can't really feel when if our, vascular system is inflamed. Can you maybe share like if like what are some of the maybe symptoms or if there are any or like what are some of the risk factors anyways of developing heart disease or cardiovascular disease?
Well, I think that's interesting. It's interesting to start that by saying a stat that blows my mind every time I think about it. Like in almost 50%, there's a heart attack that happens in this country about every 30 seconds. And about one out of 4 or 5 of those people die,
Hmm.
which is obviously massive. It's almost like hard to even comprehend.
Yeah.
Um, and yet, in almost 50% of heart attack cases that happen in a year, the first symptom that the person gets that there's something wrong is the heart attack, period. They
Wow.
otherwise were like, I think I'm good. Athletes, people that are active, etc. And then boom, they have a heart attack. So, um, so yeah, you cannot feel what that feels like in your body. The only time people get symptoms of plaque buildup in their arteries is, in my opinion, if they're lucky enough that the plaque that they have built up slowly and more stably, which we can talk about later, to the point that it didn't rupture. A ruptured plaque is what causes the heart attack or stroke to happen because a clot forms. That aside, it builds up slowly and it gets big enough that it finally starts to impede blood flow to a point that your heart starts to become like, I'm not getting enough oxygen. I'm not getting enough nutrient, whatever. I'm not getting enough blood flow. And that's when people get the classic chest pain with exercise.
Yeah.
So the size of the blockage that needs to be present for that to happen is well over 50%. So in other words, if you're thinking about your artery, over 50% of it has to be blocked in order for you to even get a symptom at all. And I think it's a, a testament to sort of like the resiliency of the system. Like your body, this is obviously a crucial system, and your body's like, I'm just going to keep going. We can do this. Let's just keep going. Yeah, we got this problem over here, but we got stuff to do. We got blood to send to places. So like, just keep going. So that's kind of how I always look at it. And then interestingly though, there are now research studies that have shown that perhaps there are some symptoms that people get earlier than that they're just not aware is connected to their vascular blood flow. Excuse me. As an example, the most classic one would be erectile dysfunction,
Hmm.
everybody's favorite topic,
Yeah.
um, uh, which some, research now suggests can be like the canary in the coal mine, where like certainly no chest pain because that's a way larger artery that's building up with plaque, but you can get some dysfunction and blockage down in those regions and start to affect function there. Um, and people don't necessarily make that connection. Another one that always blew my mind was back pain.
Mm.
So there's some research that suggests that many of the cases of disc bulges and back pain, at least a decent portion of them, may be the result of plaque buildup in arteries that are feeding the spine. And there's some, actually, if anybody on here, I'm sure you know Dr. Greger's work, nutritionfacts.org. He's got
Yeah.
some really fascinating videos detailing that information. So, you know, it's not easy to go by how you feel is the point, and which is why
Hmm.
I always repeat the mantra that Joel Kahn drilled into my head, which is test and don't guess.
Mm.
Just look and don't just try to make a guess on what's going on by just talking to somebody.
Yeah. Um, so, okay. So, um, in terms of like lifestyle and diet, are there certain things that most people are doing that can be contributing to this, or um, what are some of the first things that you come to mind as far as like lifestyle or dietary factors that can promote heart disease?
Okay, okay. Um, well, far and away to me, diet is is the most potent contributor. Barring you could argue like chain smoking is worse, but I don't know that many people that smoke anymore. I
Yeah.
certainly don't see patients that smoke almost ever. Obviously, there's still a lot of people doing it, but like for the things that most people are doing, everybody's putting food into their mouths 1 to 3+ times a day. Um, and one of my mentors, Dr. Esselstyn,
Mm.
would always say cardiovascular disease is a postprandial disorder, meaning postprandial means after eating. So all the effects that happen that go into action in your body that create this problem happen, many of them happen as a result of what you eat almost instantly, positive or negative. So like, you can eat junk food, high fat, tons of animal food, saturated fat, refined sugar, so on and so forth. All of these things you can find in research cause dysfunction and inflammation, oftentimes in the vascular system, which over time is one of the things that would contribute to the whole process involved in plaque formation. Whereas other foods, like you probably have already eaten today, um, have like a direct opposite effect. So not just neutral. It's not like we're just trying to not eat harmful things. I always stress to people, it's probably equally, if not more important, to make sure you're eating beneficial things that actually have been shown to reduce inflammation, to encourage healing and function and resiliency in the artery linings. Um, that people aren't eating enough of. So it's that combination. And I mean, certainly there's tons of other things: lack of movement, lack of exercise, high stress, poor sleep. Uh, pretty much, if you just analyzed how a modern human lives, uh, almost everything they do is at least having some negative effect. It's just that certain things have a stronger effect. So it's almost like you want to just look at how the classic modern human lives and do the opposite, and you're probably going to do pretty well.
Yeah.
Um, so and then obvious, and again, we can talk about this if you want, like in terms of like why does plaque happen?
Yeah.
Uh, there's absolutely a genetic component as well in some people. Um, and there's not this one simple, like, all cases of cardiovascular disease happen for the same exact reasons in each person's body. That's a complex process, and there's a lot of different things that can add to the risk and detract from the risk depending on the person.
Gotcha. Um, yeah, I would actually love to hear your explanation of like why plaque forms. Like what is the process that creates the plaquing in the arteries? And then yeah, let's start with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I'll acknowledge is that even at the cutting edge of this research, they're still learning and still finding more things out. And so I always say, anybody out there who's speaking to you in absolutes about cardiovascular disease and like, this is the cause and it's not this, uh, I have a hard time trusting that they really have looked at that detail. I mean, it is absolutely true, that you cannot have plaque form in arteries if without what are called lipoproteins, the main type being LDL, without that getting into the artery lining and getting stuck in there. So you could argue of all of the things that we know, for sure, 100% is a contributor. That lipoproteins, LDL being the main one, getting into the artery linings, you can't have it happen without that.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean that it's going to happen the same in every person with equal levels in their blood or whatever, but that's a prerequisite. So I always give so to describe the process, I always give patients an analogy that it's not perfect, but it works pretty well to try to see what I'm saying. So if you think about plaque like a fire, let's just say like a fire, a campfire that you don't want to light. You don't want to be burning. Like, so it's like literally like a fire burning in your artery lining or something, or you're trying to prevent that from happening. And then you think, okay, well, what do I need to make a fire? And you boil it down to basically two main things. You need some wood to burn and you need something to light it. And technically, to have a better chance, you want to have like a fire pit where there's a bunch of that wood in there and it's all ready to burn.
Okay.
So if you think about lipoproteins, what we would technically call um, atherogenic lipoproteins, because HDL is also a lipoprotein, but it does not contribute, it doesn't work the same way. But just in general, lipoproteins, the main one is LDL. It's present in your bloodstream in the highest numbers and for the longest period of time before it gets taken out, which is why it's such a suspect. Think about that as the wood part of the equation. So normally the wood's floating around in your bloodstream, like it's all over the campground. And in order to build that fire, you need to gather some up and put it in the fire pit. And so, in other words, the LDL that's floating around in your bloodstream, which is not harming you, needs to get into the artery lining, which it can do readily. It doesn't have to be, the artery lining doesn't have to be injured. It can just pass right through there.
Hmm.
And then it has to get stuck in there, i.e., it has to build up into a spot like a fire pit. Once it gets in there, inevitably there's going to be things that start to spark the fire, so to speak. So it starts different inflammatory processes, and there's a variety of different things that can cause the LDL that's in there to get damaged. And it becomes sort of almost like a foreign substance. And if more and more and more of them get in there and that keeps happening, you start to get this like smoldering fire started, and then your body's like, oh, I need to try to get that out of there, send some white blood cells to the area to try to clean it up. And that is the process. If it becomes overwhelmed, that just builds into this inflamed big mess as your body is trying to get that out of there but not being able to.
Hmm.
So then you have all these every other risk factor you've ever heard of: diabetes, smoking, bad diet, stress, so on and so forth. Those are all like almost like gasoline. If you pour that, then it's just going to get, the more of them you are present, it's going to grow out of control quickly. And then the other part of the analogy is like, okay, well, what about if we have some water that we can pour on it to try to put it out? That's all these positive things I'm talking about. Good diet being far and away the biggest bucket of water you can throw. I mean, a lipidologist would argue statins and drugs are like that too. Whatever, they're all different types of ways to try to put the fire out. But actually, I mean, the drugs are all, there's various classes of them. Statins is the main one, but there's others. They're all working, especially from the angle of trying to keep more wood from being available to feed the fire and let it grow. Statins do have, even though I'm not a big statin proponent, I try to keep people off of them because they don't come without their own risks. I do acknowledge what they do, and they do have some anti-inflammatory effects and different things that are also supporting like putting the fire out once it's there, but their main thing that they're doing is trying to take the wood away. So it's really logical when you think about that. And then you could also sit here and say, well, anybody who says all fire is just due to matches is not really thinking about that. You have to have something to burn. So if you have these people on social media who are like, LDL means nothing, it can be as high as you want, and that's not, we've been lied to, and that's not a risk factor. They're literally saying you don't need wood to light a fire. And when you think about it that way, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. But you could also argue that it's pretty hard for wood to light itself on fire. So even if you have a decent amount of LDL around, it doesn't guarantee that everybody that has the same amount is going to have the same amount of fire. There's other factors,
Sure.
and that's the point. So everybody I talk to, I'm trying to figure out what kind of wood they have lying around, how much of it, what kind of sparks are happening in their body, what are they doing in their lifestyle to act like gasoline, and how can we pour some water on it?
Yeah.
So that's that's the basic gist of my treatment approach.
I love that. So I don't know if you want me. So I've been living this lifestyle and eating a relatively low fat plant based diet for nearly 14 years now. Just curious if I run so I just recently had a blood test done, and let me know if my lipid numbers sound okay to you. All right.
Sure.
So my
I'm not going to hold back. So beware.
No, yeah. If you see some concerns, you let me know, please. So total cholesterol was 137. Triglycerides were 94. HDL cholesterol was 41. VLDL cholesterol, I think calculated, CAL, was 18. And
Yeah.
LDL cholesterol calculated was 78. Any concerns with any of that?
So the first thing I would say is technically we're left, if that's all we have, we're kind of guessing a little bit.
Okay.
Because as you noted, these are calculated numbers. They're not direct counts of some of these things. And if we're trying to obtain as much of an understanding of risk as it's coming from that angle for somebody, it's better to look at direct counts of these molecules.
Okay.
So to do that, you could do what's called an LDL particle count, or you could do what's called an apolipoprotein B, or ApoB for short,
Sure.
APO capital B. That is a protein that's present on every lipoprotein that might possibly get stuck in the artery lining, including LDL. So it's like a way to assess how much wood is lying around the campground, twigs, larger pieces, whatever, anything. Think about it that way. Those would give a bit more of a precise count, and sometimes there's a bit of a discrepancy, but usually not. So that aside, if we're just going by what we have with you,
yep.
The first thing I always think about, are you familiar with the Framingham study?
I'm familiar with it. Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert on it.
It's one of the longest running studies, or maybe the longest running study we have going. It's like it's like 75 years old or something like that.
Wow.
Um, Thousands and thousands and thousands of people have participated in it. This is where we've learned actually a lot of the different risk factors, or gasoline, that I mentioned earlier, that we learned about them via the Framingham study, via seeing what people do and what causes cardiovascular disease. And during this whole time, they have measured people's cholesterol levels. It's one of the ways that we've learned more about that role. And what they found, just as it relates to you, is that it's exceedingly rare for somebody to get a heart attack, especially like early in their lives, before they're 80 whatever plus years old, if
Hmm.
their total cholesterol is less than 150
Okay.
naturally. So right there, you get a gold star.
All right.
There's also research from around the world looking at cultures of people who get little to no cardiovascular disease. Same deal. They all have an average of cholesterol lower than 150. So it's not the perfect number, but it's pretty good.
Sure.
I instantly feel more relaxed about somebody if I see their levels that low. Although I will tell you, I run cholesterol markers on tons of people, and I very rarely see numbers like that unless the person's eating like you or they're on the drug.
Sure.
Otherwise, it pretty much doesn't happen almost ever. Um, so that's pretty good. And then, we also want to pay attention to VLDL that you mentioned, which is a different type of uh, wood that also is now being recognized as pretty potent contributor if it's high.
Mm.
That's good with you. It relates a lot to triglycerides. Um, so in other words, triglycerides is just measuring fat in your blood, and most of that fat is actually in the VLDL.
Okay.
So, and I like triglyceride levels in the double digits. So usually the cutoff is like 150 or higher is considered high. I
Mm.
like it under 100 ideally.
Okay.
And then the only other thing I'll say is your HDL would be typically considered low.
That's what they told me.
Right. And that is a an inappropriate mindset that does not consider the entire picture. Because what HDL is, and whether or not the level of it is a risk for you, is relative to the rest of the picture. So if you look at HDL as like something that your body makes that can act like water and go in and put some fires out, you don't need as much around if you don't have any fires. You could also look at it as sort of like somebody that goes around and steals your wood, takes it away so you can't start a fire.
Hmm.
So if you don't have a lot of wood lying around, your body is very efficient. It's not going to make more HDL unless it feels like it needs to, for the most part. So it's why, like, anybody that ever says, oh, I went on a high fat, low carb diet and my HDL went up. See, my diet is protecting me. You're like, no, your body is going, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Now I have to make more of these HDL to clean up the mess that you're causing.
Mm.
That's a better way, in my opinion, to think about when people's HDL. So you'll see that happen. If you make a change and your HDL goes up, my perspective is, I don't think that's a good idea because your body's having to react to that
Sure.
to make more of these molecules. So I would give you, I would not be concerned with you, but I've learned enough that occasionally there are people that have what I consider pretty good markers
Hmm.
that I'm like, when we look at their arteries, they still have some plaque going on. And I'm like, well, those are the more rare people that have other angles of contribution that are a little less common.
Yep.
But if I had to make a decision right now, how are you doing? I would say looking pretty darn good.
Cool. Good to hear. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So people out there that get their blood tested regularly, they get the lipid panel and check these things. So do you think that, like, even for somebody like me, do you think it's a good idea to run some of these additional, like, I think the calcium score, and some other things, or ApoB and that sort of thing? Would that
Yeah.
be
So
beneficial?
so if we think about this idea of like digging a little more
Hmm.
than a standard cholesterol. So, if you go to see a primary care doctor, they're going to run your risk. They're going to look at your family history, your blood pressure, your cholesterol levels, and essentially make an estimated guess on your risk for the next 10 years. And that oftentimes is accurate, but not always. Um, and so if we're trying to just be sure and dig more, um, then there's kind of two routes to do that. There's like more lab tests, and then there's imaging studies. And the more lab tests, I think, in my opinion, everybody should have something called a lipoprotein A, small a, or lipoprotein parentheses small a. Most people just know about it as lipoprotein A. That is, think about that as like a type of wood lying around the campground that almost will. It's actually no, sorry. It's the one that you buy at the store, the Easy Light log that you just throw. You just got to touch a little spark to it, and it like lights up, and it helps you start your fire.
Hmm.
That's like lipoprotein A. It's a type of lipoprotein. These proteins that LDL is also another type that is molecule on a molecule by molecule basis. It's much more atherogenic or potentially plaque causing than even standard LDL is.
Mm.
There's just not as much of it usually floating around in people, but some people genetically make high amounts of it. And so, and again, you don't know that unless you look. And it's considered the number one, if not close to that, cause of early heart attacks in people. So in younger people that you wouldn't have expected it to happen in. And so that's kind of like the one outlier almost, where like to some degree it doesn't matter what you're eating, it can still be high.
Hmm.
Certainly, I would say with how you're eating, even if it was high, you're doing much better to protect yourselves from the negative effects of that. Even if you couldn't control that, then the
Hmm.
average American is eating a diet that just adds gasoline to the situation.
Right.
So that's something I would absolutely check. Again, the apolipoprotein B or ApoB is another one I typically screen. In your case, it would be more to confirm that I can trust your LDL, because sometimes the LDL that you have measured is, again, it's a calculation. It's not an
Hmm.
exact count. They're just making a rough estimate via
Okay.
certain means. So an ApoB would help us confirm, yeah, that is pretty low.
Hmm.
So you're good. And then beyond that, there's a number of different things that I might also check, but as a screen where I'm just trying to get a feel, especially in a younger person, I would the other major area aside from like what's going on with all these lipoproteins is inflammation levels, and then blood sugar, metabolic health, insulin related stuff. Those three big buckets are like the most research backed uh, primary factors that are having a strong contribution. So I check those things with each person, and you can screen inflammation by initially, at least. There's other ones that you can check, but initially I would screen that using something called CRP or HSCRP, and then checking the simplest way to get an idea of your blood sugar and insulin and metabolic health related markers would be like a hemoglobin A1C, or
Hmm.
A1C is typically what it's called, plus, in my opinion, a fasting insulin level.
Gotcha.
So, it would be interesting to see those with you because, as far as I know, you eat lots of carbs, and everybody says carbs are bad. And I'm like, number one, it depends on the carb. And number two, it's not that simple. So, like,
Yeah.
be surprised if your blood sugar was not good.
Yeah.
Uh, but those would
I've
be the areas.
I can rattle it off if you'd like. I got it right. So my
Yeah.
A my
Yeah.
A my A1C was 5.1, which was a little higher than it was last. It was 4.9 the last time I got it checked in 2018, but yeah, 5.1. And then actually something that I'm a little perplexed about is my fasting glucose level, which is usually in the 90s, which um, to me, I feel like it should be much lower than that. But yeah, let's see. Where did that go? My fasting. I think it was like 96 or something. So I don't know if
Well,
you have any thoughts on that.
the we never make opinions off of a glucose test by itself unless it's super high.
Okay.
Because it is a volatile number. Sometimes it's going to be lower or higher. A1C is typically a more uh, accurate way of getting an overall assessment of what your averages have been over about 3 months.
Okay.
So 5.1 is pretty darn perfect. I
Awesome.
mean, it's and especially I just think it's so interesting to emphasize you eat boatloads of carbohydrate as far
Yes.
as I know,
Oh yeah.
especially the apparently quote unquote worst kind fructose or fruit, a lot of fruit,
Yeah, I have a
and yet
big fruit and green smoothie every morning. So
yeah. So I mean, it's clearly not that cut and dried, and that's because there's other factors that go into why people have high blood sugar and diabetes. But just a good reminder to everybody, like, see, it's not that straightforward. And so, I certainly wouldn't be worried about your numbers. I mean, the only other thing you can do within reason is what's called a glucose tolerance test, or you could wear a continuous glucose monitor and watch how your blood sugar goes throughout the whole day.
okay.
Um, but yeah, I would be putting more, because the whole reason why we care about high blood sugar is the potential damage that it does to the proteins in your body.
Mm,
Um, and so an A1C is a blood test where they're looking at hemoglobin as a molecule in your red blood cells. So hemoglobin A1C, what they're doing there is they're looking at of all of your red blood cells, what proportion of them has the hemoglobin molecule been damaged by sugar. So it's why it's a percentage. When you read it, it's 5.1%.
hmm
It's saying that 5.1% of your red blood cells have damaged hemoglobin.
Interesting.
And that's coming, or glycated hemoglobin technically, so protein damaged by sugar. And there's a certain amount that's normal and does not reflect like increased risk of a problem. Um, and so it's why it's a bit more of an accurate way of seeing things. So like clearly your hemoglobin molecules are pretty well protected. But
Yeah.
you could do a fasting insulin, you could do a challenge where you see like your fasting blood sugar and then you eat a bunch of fruit and then what does it go up to and then how quickly does it come back down. These are all more advanced ways to further evaluate that.
Sure.
But the
I
other
have
thing,
done that too.
oh, you have.
Just with my own I have a
Oh,
glucometer,
okay.
and so I've done many tests where I'll drink just a huge fruit smoothie, like an entire Vitamix carafe,
Uh-huh.
and I'll test it 30, 60, 90, 120 minutes
Nice.
afterwards, and it goes up to like, I mean, like maybe 130, and then it goes
Yeah,
right back down under 100, like
perfect.
within a short amount of time. So
That's totally perfect. And that's totally natural. A lot of people are wearing these continuous glucose monitors now. I talk to these patients who get put on them by their nutritionists and whatever.
yep,
They're freaking out about anything that they eat that makes their blood sugar go up at all. And
yeah,
that's totally natural. It's actually, there's good research to show that it's important for that to happen. It also stimulates production of other things, balance of electrolytes and different things in your body that are signaled when you get some insulin secretion. What's not natural is for it to go way high, like, out of range,
hmm
and or to not come back down quickly. So if you have a large area under the curve they call where your blood sugar goes up and then it stays high for a while until it comes back down, that's not good. And the interesting thing is a lot of people are told, "Oh, to keep your blood sugar from spiking, make sure you eat a lot of fat with your meal."
nice,
And what you'll see if you watch those people on a continuous glucose monitor is they'll get less of a quick and high spike, but then the sugar just lasts in the blood a lot longer than it would have normally.
Mm,
And it's because the fat that they're consuming is disrupting how their body's metabolizing that sugar and taking it into their cells through with insulin, with the help of insulin. So it's definitely not a good way to go.
yeah. Oh, well, thanks for that explanation.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so let me see here. Oh, also for everybody out there, Dr. Chong has recently written a post, an article called "A Deep Dive into the Process of Atherosclerosis." I'll link that down below for you to check out as well. And then also, you have a few. So I checked out your YouTube. I see you have two channels. Each one has
Oh
one.
God.
Each one has one lecture. So still, I mean, not
Not
much
quite
there,
there. Yeah, not
but
quite there yet. Not
yeah,
quite
but
there yet. I got
still very valuable. So I do recommend. I got it linked in the description box below for people to check out those two lectures that you have.
Yeah,
Really,
I definitely definitely not really dived into that. I'm trying to find the time to do it.
yeah, I hear you.
I would definitely say my Instagram, and then I also have a vital dash human. I mean, I have a website, vital-human.com, but I have a Facebook page
Okay,
um, that I can send you. I don't know if you have that. Those are where I much more regularly share information.
okay,
Um, I find Instagram to be a little bit challenging to do that sometimes because I like to provide links to references for what I'm saying. I don't just like to give my opinion with nothing to
yeah,
back it up. And it's a little hard to do that on Instagram,
right.
but yeah, that's the YouTube channel is pretty sad right now.
Well, hey, like I said, that at least you got things of high value. So there's a lot of good
Thank
information in those lectures.
thank you.
Yeah. All right. So let's see. Do I have other for other questions here? Otherwise, we could maybe jump in. We're doing this a little differently than normal. We usually just go straight into the three. We each bring three kind of ideas or suggestions for people on the topic. And also before we get into that, just want to say hey to everybody in the chat. I've got the chat pulled up here on the YouTube video. And so great to see everybody. JJ, Ryan, Judy, Carl. Great. Thanks for being here. And I hope you guys will have some questions at the end for the Q&A. So I don't know if you want to, like, we could if there's if you have like three, top ways to, to maybe prevent or to protect the health of your heart as you age, I guess is how I say it. I've got three
Well,
things that I could throw at you and maybe just get your thoughts on. And
yeah, you do that first, and then I'll
okay,
tack on any other thoughts I have.
sure, okay. So I tried to be uh, kind of fancy with mine. So my first one is eat your reds. Right, so eat the plant pigments with red, the carotenoids and flavonoids. From my understanding, is that they are very cardiovascular protective, um, and that's through things like reducing inflammation and oxidative stress. They are supposed to inhibit platelet formation and enhance the function of our endothelium, the endothelial cells, to help produce more nitric oxide, which helps the blood flow through and keeps it functioning correctly. Also, polyphenols, from what I've researched, inhibit the activation of a transcription factor called NF kappa B. And so transcription factors are essentially proteins that help to determine which genes turn on and off. At least that's one of the things that they do. And so when NF kappa B is overactivated, so we need it to be activated sometimes, but if it's overactivated, what it does is, I guess one of the functions is it initiates inflammatory mediators like cytokines and chemokines. And so a little bit of activation is necessary for the proper health of our blood vessels and of just all of our cells. But if it's overactivated, then it can lead to chronic inflammation and things. So that's one of the things that I've read. Polyphenols such as anthocyanins, polyphenols, flavonoids, which are a subset of polyphenols. But yeah, so anthocyanins, the purple or the red pigments, can really help with that. Supposedly, they lower cholesterol, lower triglycerides, lower LDL. They reduce oxidated LDL and lower blood pressure. So some of the things that I just kind of looked up there, and yeah, so I would say eat your reds would be my first thing. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Uh, Totally agree. I mean, I think the underlying take home message is it's like eat the rainbow,
Yeah.
right? Like, because you hear a lot about greens and maybe fiber,
Yep.
but we don't hear enough about the reds and the oranges and the yellows.
Yeah.
So totally agree. And the other thing I always think about, I also oftentimes come from the perspective of T. Colin Campbell, who's not a big not meant to rain on what you just said, but he's not a big fan
Reductionism.
of, yeah, reductionism, exactly.
Yeah,
His book Whole is my favorite nutrition book of all time.
I agree.
Um, and so I do think it's these things are super important to understand why these foods are helping us.
Yeah.
Um, but the bottom line is eat them and eat a wide variety of these plant foods regularly, and you're going to do pretty well, I think. So that's kind of how I think about it. And then uh, did, was there? Do you want me to give some too now? Some
Sure.
thoughts?
Yeah, if you've got one to throw out, go
Yeah.
for it.
Um, well, I don't know about them. I'm not going to say these are the most impactful because I think diet is the most important thing you can do uh, if you had to pick one to help prevent cardiovascular disease or encourage it, depending on how you're eating. Um, uh, so aside from that, a couple of things I was thinking about that are a little less well recognized, but still potentially very potent. One would be grounding or
Mm.
earthing, is what you'd call it. Um, I don't know. I'm sure a lot of your audience knows about that. I guarantee you do.
Hmm. I
And
do.
it's a fascinating thing. There's a lot of different potential benefits from it, but in the realm of cardiovascular health, we do not want sludgy blood. We don't want blood that's floating around where the red cells are clumped together, and which is what happens immediately after a high fat meal of almost any kind. Um, because when you have sludgy blood that's thick and floating around like that way, it stresses out the artery linings in certain ways that are one of the contributors to the process underlying a plaque forming. And when your body is designed, the red blood cells are normally designed to repel each other and not clump together. And there's this electromagnetic energy, so to speak, that is involved in that, and it's called the zeta potential, ZETA potential. So basically the more zeta potential your red blood cells are, the better they repel each other like two wrong ends of a magnet and keep from clumping together, and which would inevitably lead to blood flowing better. And earthing or grounding has been shown in research to increase the zeta potential in your body. So every time you touch your skin to the skin of the earth, you're instantly getting an improvement in that parameter. And they've even done, interestingly, we just had this virus around for a while. I don't know if you heard about it. It's called COVID-19.
Something like, yeah. Rings a bell.
And one of the things that was seen to be involved in more severe cases where people died more easily had to do with blood clotting.
Mm.
And I saw a research study where they actually took people with an active COVID infection and grounded some of them, and they had better outcomes just from that, no other intervention, than the people that were not grounded. So, and in all likelihood, it was because it was probably helping keep their blood from clotting as much and sticking together and blah, blah, blah. There's probably other things, but so that's one thing. Try to ground yourself every day, ideally multiple times a day. No, another one I think that is really important is optimizing the production of melatonin in your
Mm.
body via appropriate light exposure throughout the day. So a lot of people know that, your bedroom should be dark at night. And the darker it is, the more melatonin you're likely going to produce. And melatonin has clearly been shown to help reduce risk for atherosclerosis or for plaque in your arteries. What less people know, except for probably the people on your channel, is that when you have appropriate light exposure in the daytime, especially full spectrum sunlight in the middle of the day, touching your skin, face, wherever, you actually get better melatonin production at night. So making sure to go out for a walk at lunchtime if you're an office worker um, is going to help for a lot of things, but that's one of them. Even if it's cloudy, even if it's raining, you're still going to get that benefit. And then the other thing is the light that shows up in the morning, first thing, and in the evening at dusk is more red light. And it's not a full spectrum, but the red light has other positive effects on your metabolism, insulin regulation, blood sugar regulation, etc. So getting outside for 5 minutes first thing in the morning, ideally right before you eat something, um, and then also exposing your eyes and skin to some evening light can also have additional benefits. So there's all these things that we don't have to buy, we don't have to get a bottle for, we don't have to do anything, just do what we used to do all the time naturally, but now we have to make a point of it because we're all inside all the time, not touching the earth, not getting appropriate light exposure, and then instead we're getting ourselves exposed to artificial light, which has many negative effects that we don't even have time to go into, is super easy to do and very potent. And so that was two, earth
Yeah.
grounding and light exposure. And then the last one we already alluded to that I think is just so important is for people to not guess or assume that things are going well. Obviously, if you're eating really well, you're going to be doing better than most people. But I've seen enough of a percentage of people that we found surprising things that we had to work more directly on when we actually looked a little bit more, using more advanced lab testing, potentially using imaging studies. Uh, just make sure you know where you're at so that you know how much direct attention you should place on things. Until then, absolutely eat super well, exercise, all these other things are going to help, but no harm in making sure.
Those are awesome. Yeah, couldn't agree more on all of those, but especially the melatonin. I just recently looked into that for a previous episode, and yeah, apparently our skin produces serotonin when we're exposed to sunlight, which is a precursor for melatonin, so it helps in the production, I guess. So thought that was pretty cool. But yeah,
Yeah.
great. Great tips. One other one I'll just throw in there that I had written down was, and it kind of goes along with the first one I wrote, but not regarding the red pigments, but also eating. So I wrote down, eat your 5-star salads in the sunlight. Because I saw I saw a Dr. Greger video talking about how people that eat leafy greens, nitrate rich leafy greens, and then they go into the sunlight, people think that the sunlight stops at their skin, but it actually goes through the skin, like through the body, basically all the way through almost, or maybe fully through the body. And those UV rays actually interact with the, I don't know if it's the chlorophyll or if it's the nitrates.
It's the,
Somehow they,
it's the chlorophyll.
the chlorophyll, okay, yeah, it reacts with the chlorophyll and helps produce more nitric oxide. So just being out in the sunlight with having those leafy greens going through your system can increase nitric oxide. Do you have
Okay,
anything?
I'm gonna tack on to that.
Yeah,
I
cool.
also read a study looking specifically at consumption of green vegetables. And then you get this I might be mixing it up with what you just said. Maybe you saw something else, but uh when you eat green vegetables and you get chlorophyll in your bloodstream, and then you expose that to UV light from the sun, you also produce more coenzyme Q10 or CoQ10. that can help mitochondrial energy production. So believe it or not, you can make energy just by the combination of sunlight and green vegetables. So we're almost kind of like plants. So almost like we're sort of borrowing something from plants, and then we're almost like making energy that way too, which is just mind blowing. But yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is what the video is about. I meant to go back and look before the show, but I didn't have a
Yeah,
chance.
yeah,
Yeah, cool. Thanks for
very
that.
cool. Yeah,
All right. Well, that was amazing. So we can get into the Q&A now if you got a few minutes here to answer some questions from the audience.
sure. Happy to
Uh,
try.
all right, cool. And as you guys know, as always, we do a giveaway. If you ask a question, you'll be put into a drawing to receive any of. You can pick one of my ebooks or one of the ebook versions of my books, and then also Dr. Chong has a ebook as well that you'll receive as well. And then also, of course, I think we might be down to the last free code to give away a free bottle of Daily Green Boost for you guys. So whoever wins is going to get that last code. And so, yeah, let's get some questions rolling in here. Let's see here. Let me pull up the chat. Okay. I don't see any questions yet. So guys, get them thrown in there. If you got any questions, now is the time. Before we do get into the Q&A, one last time, you just want to quick share where the best place is to follow you, and do you have a newsletter or anything like that?
I have a blog on my website that I more frequently than my YouTube channel add things to. But definitely my Instagram page and my Facebook page are where I provide the most like regular content to.
Okay.
And then my website obviously has there's some interesting stuff there. There's like one thing that some people like is there's a questionnaire that helps you calculate your risk more thoroughly just from these questions than is typically done in the conventional practice. So yeah, my website's just vital-human.com.
Awesome. All right. Let's hop over in front of the blackboard here. We'll start taking some questions, and thankfully the chat does show up on the blackboard, so I don't necessarily have to pull up the YouTube channel. Okay, still, I mean, you must have covered everything so
I guess
thoroughly.
so,
Let me just throw one out here, and just kind of a fun one, but like what is like a day in the life of eating for Dr. Chong?
Um, it does depend. um, I'm not perfect, but I try to be pretty good most of the time.
Hmm.
So usually in the morning, I'll have either overnight oats, where I'm just soaking oats with some type of plant milk, a little cinnamon, a little nutmeg, some type of frozen berry, uh, and put that in overnight oats, make that up, have that in the morning,
Sure.
or a big green smoothie with basically some type of leafy green, celery, bananas, water and ice usually. And then lunch, I do like to, I think socializing is very important. So I will oftentimes go out to lunch with colleagues, friends of mine that are in the area and try to eat. I mean, I'm always eating plant-based, but what I eat is a wide variety, Thai food, different things like that. Try to get no oil added because I'm not a big oil fan. Lots of vegetables, etc. And then my favorite things for dinner are like either potatoes and whole grains, or sorry, either potatoes or whole grains with some type of like legume based soup or stew or something like that, like lentil. I love lentil soup, and always lots of vegetables, and usually a salad. Trying to get in the habit of two salads a day, two big salads a day.
Nice.
But a lot of times I'm rushing around or whatever. So But yeah, that's pretty much it. I do not snack almost ever.
Hmm,
Um, and yeah, lots of water. I do have like a chai, like a chai in the morning with like some oat, like a little bit of oat, a little bit of oat milk in there. But
nice.
yeah, that's pretty much it.
Cool. I'm not really a big snacker either. Is there a specific reason why you don't snack, or just because you don't?
Well, I mean, partially eating this way, I I don't get hungry in between meals almost ever.
Hmm.
So that's the main thing. I also don't know that that's I do think it's important to give your digestive system a break. And so I'm not a big, I mean, there are some situations where perhaps people doing higher amounts, small amounts, you know, more meals might be appropriate for them. But for the average person, I think giving like eat, break, or even 2 meals a day for some people, I can't do that. I have like my metabolism is too high. I will literally just start losing muscle.
Sure.
Um,
Nice.
Especially because I'm not eating cheeseburgers and what fries, and
Right.
high calorie density food. So
Yep. Cool. All
yeah.
right. Mark says, any types of workouts that you like to recommend? Yoga, weights, walking, breath work, stretching, anything in particular that you like?
So I think there's a lot of good ways to go about exercise, but the main message I give to people is more to make a point of moving frequently throughout the day and not spending much time seated or not moving, um, without purposefully moving your body, at least
Mm,
for even a couple of minutes. I always remember this research study I saw where they took two groups of people and they had them do an 8 hour day at a cubicle, like sitting at a desk. And one group of people, and sorry, beforehand they tested like different parameters of health. I can't remember exactly what measurable things. And then one group of people, they had at the end of the 8 hour day, they did a 60-minute workout on a treadmill at a certain speed. And then the other group of people, they had do 6 separate 10-minute treadmill workouts spread out throughout the day with the so that at the end of the workout, they had all done the same amount of actual exercise. So the same speed on the treadmill, et cetera. But one was just spliced out 6 times, 10 minutes, and the other was 60 minutes.
hmm,
And the people that did the spread out exercise fared better on all the things that they measured.
oh,
And it's not to say that the 60-minute treadmill isn't better than nothing by far,
mhm,
but there's something. So not only is exercise good for us, but sitting is uniquely bad for us, and we're not designed for that. So that's the main thing I try to get people to do, and then I just some resistance training and walking, hiking. I do like a lot like regular sort of longer term zone 2 type of training where you're not really killing yourself. You're just sort of like getting your blood flowing, still able to have a conversation. There's some good research about that. But my main thing is move often, don't sit a lot.
love it. Yeah, I've got a walking treadmill desk
Yeah,
treadmill, whatever you call it. Definitely recommend getting one of those. It's so helpful if you're sitting at a computer a lot during the day. Um,
yeah, for
yeah,
sure. I haven't gotten one of those yet, but
yeah,
it's on my list.
sure. Yeah, it's been a big game changer for me. So, um, Judith says, "What is chai, and how much water
Oh.
do you drink?"
Chai, I believe, is a traditionally an Indian sort of hot beverage. Uh, I like it because I mean, the ingredients are like a who's who of amazingly potent plant medicines. If anybody's hasn't read, like, if you read Dr. Greger's book, How Not to Age, he talks about all of them basically. But it's basically got like, uh, um, now I'm on the spot here. It's got some black tea in it, but then it has like turmeric and nutmeg and cloves and all of these different super potent antioxidant herbs in it. Um, and so and it's pretty tasty. So I do that. And then I try to drink like probably about 80 ounces of water a day. which will not be quite that high if I have like a big smoothie. I'd prefer to get fluid from fruits and vegetables, of like the fluid that's inside of those as much as I can. But yeah, about that.
Nice. Carl says, when moving lots throughout the day, when do you need to stretch? At the end of the day or when doing your main strenuous exercise? Both, probably.
I am not a big proponent. I mean, I'm not an expert in this field. Just my opinion. I'm not a big proponent of stretching before exercise. And I'm not a big proponent really of static stretching in general. I'm much more think there's more benefit to be had from what you'd call like active stretching.
Hmm.
I personally have been dabbling a lot in work from the knees over toes guy.
Hmm.
If you have ever heard of that person, he's and they're big into sort of like strengthening while stretching. And there's different ways to exercise that way, and that helps potentially more potently build the resiliency of your tendons and things like that. Whereas passive stretching is more oftentimes kind of like stretching your ligaments a little bit more. So I'm just a big proponent in general of the body reacts to what you do to it. And so stressing it in certain ways like that can help build tissue resiliency.
Cool.
That's my opinion anyways.
Yeah, sounds good to me. I've never been a big stretcher. Honestly, I don't like stretching, but yeah,
Well, I will
I
say
have
I
been.
have, sorry, go ahead.
I have been trying to do more of it lately, but yeah.
Yeah, I will say like I have some on again, off again, long-term low back problems in my because I think I overstretched in my 20s doing a lot of yoga
Mm,
and just not really doing it right, just trying to from my ego, trying to like get my head between my knees and that type of thing. And I think I have a bit of a lumbar problem now because of that. So trying to work backwards from that now.
there. Carl says that's very helpful. Thank you. He says he does follow the knees over toes guy, but he needs to properly study up. So he says thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Well,
Judith said, and you did just kind of mention this, but she said, do you eat three meals a day with no snacks, and do you eat at certain times?
yeah. So I most days I eat 3 meals a day. Sometimes my breakfast is a little small. Like sometimes I'll just have a couple pieces of fruit, and then because I'm like started eat eight later than I wanted to or whatever. Um, I do think it's important to have something to eat relatively soon after waking up, within an hour or so, for circadian rhythm purposes. So in other words, to start your metabolism going in the right direction, and then stopping eating relatively early. So at least 3 hours before dinner. I'm sorry, at least finishing dinner at least 3 hours before bedtime,
Mhm.
I think is a good general rule to try to stick with. And then I also try to do about a 12 hour overnight fast. So if I stop eating at 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, I'm not going to eat again until 8 in the morning. But it's better to err on the side of an earlier dinner rather than a later breakfast. It's not very good, and from what I've read, to delay your breakfast, or especially to skip breakfast altogether.
All right, perfect. And last question. We're at about our time here. So Judith just wants to know, where do you get your chai? Is it on Amazon?
Ah, I get it at a local store here. It's a good quality one. I can look it up really quick. No affiliation. Um, yeah, it's called Blue Lotus Chai.
Hmm, I've heard of
You
that.
can definitely get it online. And I like the golden masala version because it has some turmeric in there, and the other ones don't. And it has some maca and some other things in there that I like. So that one works well.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's quick scroll through here, and we're just going to see who the winner is of this contest here. And we've got Mark Liu. So, Mark, congratulations. Just send me an email at matt@myrawintuition.com. You'll get, you can choose whichever book of mine you'd like the ebook copy. You'll also get a free bottle of Daily Green Boost, and you're going to get Dr. Chong's ebook as well. What was the title of your ebook, Dr. Chong?
It's called The Flow Method for
Oh, yes.
Preventing Heart Attacks, I believe.
Nice. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for offering that. Very generous. I appreciate that. And yeah, Mark, just send me an email. Thanks everybody else for your questions. Those are some great questions today. And thanks everybody for being here. Definitely, go check out Dr. Chong. Follow him on his social media. I've got it all linked in the description box down below. And yeah, any last words before we log off here?
I'll just say kudos to anybody that's following you and your stuff because they're already well on their way, you know. Um,
You.
it's a hard world to figure out what to eat in, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing because no doubt you're helping people.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, and likewise, thank you for doing what you do. I really appreciate the information you're putting out there and giving people the confidence to follow this lifestyle based on evidence. So,
Yeah.
all right, everybody, we'll see you next week, same time, same place, and we'll have another guest to talk about some more fun health-related topics. So I hope you all have a great week, and we'll catch you next time. Always follow your raw intuition.